push updates on Friday, which is sensible, sort of. Really, they should push it on Saturday, but you know, if they want to go on Friday afternoon, that's usually a good time. But this is when Brain Food Live is on, so it's often.
I think you need to ask them. You have to say, "I'm the biggest show on Crowdcast."
I know. It's like, what are they doing?
Move
Do they not know what goes on Friday 2 p.m.? Anyway, folks, we're live, everybody. Welcome to Brain Food Live on Air. It is episode 284. We are bringing it to you every Friday, no fail. And guess what? We are just trucking on with our 2004 review series. For people who don't know, basically my plan was to try and do a look back kind of series of episodes where we're going to just select key topics that have been important for us in recruitment. And then just, you know, review them with an expert, ideally with proprietary information, so we could just have a look at what's happening this year. We're coming to the end of it. What is going on? Maybe we can then sort of set the scene there to forecast going forward as well. So this is the series, and I'm delighted to be talking about the state of flexible working. This is the alternative workforce, aka the freelancer workforce, aka anybody that's non-FTE. And there's nobody better to be having this conversation than the Faroese hero, that is Rune Reistrup, CEO of Juno. So, Rune, wonderful to see you here. For the folks who don't know you, why don't you quickly introduce yourself? Who are you? What it is you do?
So I am Runar. I am the CEO of Juno. So Juno is this platform where companies find, manage, pay everything, their entire contractor workforce.
Yeah, fantastic stuff. And Rune and I had a fantastic conversation a couple of months or so ago, just detailing your career history and career journey. Fascinating stuff. So if you want to know more about Rune personally, do check out that Founders Focus episode. But let's dive straight into it, Rune. The reason why we wanted you on the show here was just to share, you know, what you can kind of tell us from the transactions that have been occurring within the platform, and also your general interactions in the space. What is the state of, if you could summarize sort of the freelancer labor market, at least as far as the UK is concerned, what does it actually look like for you?
If we take it to the labor market, as it relates to just work and skills, then I think most companies that we speak to are finding themselves either under a hiring freeze or actively reducing headcount. And at the same time, they face this skills shortage. So over 80% of leaders say that they have a challenge securing the right skills. So how does that work out in companies where you can't hire more and you have a massive skills shortage? That kind of seems to be the paradox that many talent acquisition leaders find themselves in, is the companies really needs to adapt to AI, etc., but they just can't hire anyone. In the meantime, if you look at the freelancer market that we sit in, so we have proprietary data on the daily lives of 130,000 freelancers, and we can see in that pool that availability of freelancers has never been higher, except 2 months during the peak of COVID. So we are in not great times if you're a freelancer. It meant that day rates took a hit in 2021, 22. They've since stabilized, but they're not growing. And obviously, as we all know, cost of living, etc., is growing. So freelancers are having a tougher life. So what do freelancers do when they get a tougher life? Do they seek employment? They don't. So not the ones that we are looking at least. So they are freelancers by vocational choice. They are effectively running a micro business. And like any micro business, when times go up, there's boom times and they benefit. When times get tougher, they have to adapt. And that's exactly what freelancers are doing. So we see that those freelancers are skilling up. So in a way, kind of increasing the value that they can provide to companies. So if you look at a freelancer during boom times, they'll earn more. They'll work their asses off. If you look at freelancers during downtimes, they will hunker down and use any downtime to upskill because they are competing against the other market businesses out there. So in a way, that kind of that adaptability of freelancers make them a very good fit for companies because they're in the same situation. They are looking for skills, can't hire.
Yeah, and you know what? Your characterization of freelancers as kind of a mini business does actually put that into context because, folks, the cost of running a business has increased. So you know, it's not just the inflation issue is not just hitting people at the individual level, hitting people at a company level as well. But some really sort of interesting points you mentioned there. So freelancer high availability rate translates into tough market conditions because it basically means there's lots of labor competing for the contracts that are out there, presumably because there hasn't been a growth of those contracts. Companies have been crunching down on budget or whatever it is. They're not like throwing stuff freely around. So we've seen more availability on freelancers. You're saying that in terms of rate, it hasn't decreased, but it's stabilized in an inflationary environment. So in real terms, it has decreased, but we on the raw numbers, it looks the same on a kind of a plateau. So I assume that means that companies are being quite tough with their negotiating. So they're saying, okay, this is the rate, take or leave. And I guess contractors, because of the conditions, they've kind of got to roll with what's on offered. Is that a fair sort of summary of that, Runa?
Yeah, I don't know if it's so much that they've been tough on negotiation, right? The quality is what the quality. Quality has a price. I think it's more that companies were having trouble finding even freelance workforce during the boom times in 2021, and that pushed up prices. So again, we're dealing with a market economy here, much more so than with employees that expect that yes, their salaries would grow, but they don't work in a kind of a live market at any given time. Freelancers are much more going to, okay, right now I have 5 companies vying for my skill set. That pushes prices up. There are fewer of us that are available. That pushes prices up. So I don't think it's the negotiation as such, but it's more just the general market condition. But the interesting thing is here is that on the one side, you're now finding companies that have a real skills challenge, and on the other side, you're finding a freelancer workforce that is higher skilled than ever, and in real terms, as you say, cheaper than they used to be a few years ago. And that is starting to kind of get home with the talent acquisition community to say, well, I'm now hiring or I'm acquiring skills to the business. It's less so about kind of getting an employee because people are moving rapidly towards skill-based. So I'm looking at what are your skills, not so much what is your personal situation, what's your CV. And it makes them kind of go quicker at looking at, well, if you're looking for skills rather than an employee to fill a seat, why don't we look into the entire market? Why do we limit ourselves to the FTE market? So we're seeing a lot of interest from companies saying, well, if we're going to be surviving under this hiring freeze for a long time, and we continue to have to adapt to an ever-increasing pace of change around us, let's get a flexible workforce that we can tap into, pay them what we need for the skills. I don't think they're negotiating hard for those skills, but they're saying, well, we need those skills and we need them now, but we don't need them necessarily in 6 months. But there comes contracting, or we'll need this skill. We just don't know how it's going to evolve in the next 24 months. So we might need somebody now for 6 months, somebody else in 6 months, and somebody else again. So talent acquisition teams, they used to say we deal with FTEs only, are becoming very, very interested in the contractor workforce. And I think that's ultimately going to be the kind of the savior for those freelancers and contractors that have now been holding out for 2-3 years in a tough market.
No, that's a really interesting summary. So I forget who I heard it from, but so freelancing or freelance hiring has kind of been the skills-based hiring before skills-based hiring, wasn't it? I mean,
Yeah, exactly.
when you're looking for somebody, I don't know whether anybody's ever hired a sort of someone freelance, whether you're using a Unijuno or using any type of freelancing service, you already probably have in mind like what kind of output you're looking for. Unless you're hiring for a strategic person whose job is to, specifically, tease out a thought process. Most of the case, you're looking for an engineer to build this, or even a recruiter to add a capacity, or a designer to iterate on a website. You already have a clue, and almost always you're going to have some sort of assessment sort of in mind already. So it's a skills-based hiring before skills-based hiring. So I wonder whether it's actually dovetailing very nicely with another major trend that we've seen organizations move forward from. Worth diving into that a little bit later. When we bring Solon on, I'm kind of keen to see whether that freelancing assessment mentality is bled into like FTE hiring also, and what have you. But yeah, really interesting to try and keep that into context. In terms of the sort of TA interest in freelancing, would it be fair to say that that's the shift to be made in this in the sense that traditionally freelancers have been hired, or non-FTEs have been hired by other sort of functions other than talent acquisition, which is focused more on FTE and people are going to be on payroll. It's been handled, for instance, by line managers, I think, mainly. And oftentimes in response to, let's say, a failure of TA to deliver the candidate in a timely manner, is like, all right, we'll plug it with a freelancer. I know a guy, or something like this. So that's been the history. Do you see that transitioning so that TA takes on more responsibility for that frame? Or is that a good thing that TA does that, or should kind of roll with it as a separate thing? What's your take on TA's kind of interest in non-FTE?
It was definitely, as you say, and no, we could just call it by his name, right? Freelancers or non-FTEs used to be seen as gap fillers, keep the seat warm, make sure I don't lose the budget here, or let's get the project moving while we hire somebody else. Now that's changing. So companies, 65% of companies are now looking at a future where they're going to increase their use of contractors, and this is strategic use of contractors as a flexible workforce on tap. And when you start looking at it as a strategic resource, I think it needs to move above hiring manager level. I still think the hiring manager is the best person to make the choice, the decision of who to hire, but the company needs a strategy, and that strategy can't sit everywhere. And it sits pretty well with TAs, it's pretty well with HRs, it's pretty well with procurement. It's a kind of a partnership across those three areas is what we usually see. And they will say, well, if we're going to work more with contractors, and if skills-based hiring is going to be critical for kind of navigating the changes that come, which 80% of executives believe is skill-based hiring is really important, then what these teams are looking for and these companies are looking for is, okay, but what is the strategic approach to contractors look like, or flexible work?
Yeah.
And they're looking at, you can outsource this. So there are companies you can outsource this to, and that's been the traditional way. But outsourcing is hardly strategic. So if you want to be strategic about your flexible workforce, you're not going to outsource that. You're never going to outsource your HR and TA functions, really, right? So companies are looking for solutions that can and have allowed them to map the skills of the people that they have on tap. And very often that also flows into just mapping the skills of everyone. So those two are converging to say, okay, as an organization, I want to map all the skills of my FTEs, but I also want to map the skills of all the people that are my flexible workforce, the freelancers that I already know, the people I've worked with. So building these internal marketplaces of either just freelancers, which is kind of level one, or freelancers and now negating your definition before of what's flexible workers. The flexible workers are anyone that's not an FTE. Some companies say, no, actually, our FTEs can also be flexible. They have their downtimes. I should be able from this department to tap into hung for a special project because he has special skills for maybe 2 days, maybe an hour, maybe a month. So companies are looking at, well, if we can't hire, they become creative around, well, how can we find the skill? Well, the skill exists in the building. Then we go there. The skill doesn't exist in the building, but we know somebody, one of our freelancers that has worked with us in the past. They go into their, I call it kind of almost like the freelancer CRM or the freelance management system, to go in and say, okay, who's worked with us? How did they perform? What was their rate? Are they available? So they're looking for that kind of solution. And then, of course, the recruitment of new freelancers, that hasn't changed that much. That we still have the recruiters and we have the marketplaces. But I think what we're seeing a lot more of is companies saying, yes, that's good. We still need to recruit for skills. But how about we start really making sure that we know who we know, and everyone in the organization knows who we knows, and those are the kind of initiatives that we see being driven by a partnership of kind of TA, HR, and procurement right now. It's almost like a buying channel for skills.
Yeah, and I'm starting to get a few sort of ideas as to what we mean by like strategic hiring of freelancers, right? So let's say base case is, look, it's a backfill. That's the sort of the least mature phase of hiring a freelancer, is that you need it because you just got to get things started. It's not ideal. It's a reluctant sort of project, let's say, because it's expensive. It's all this type of stuff. But there's also a way to think of it in a proactive way, and a couple of reasons for this. Number one, it increases the kind of the agility of your workforce. So if we've had 2 years worth of scaling up and scaling back down again, this oscillation is very, very destructive. If you're hiring full-time employees, that's hugely destructive. If you've had to overhire, then you've had to cut back, and then you've had another cut back. Like any HR person or TA person or even senior manager that's had to do this will tell you, cutting once is really tough, but cutting twice in a short space of time can be like completely fatal to the culture of that department, because it's very, very disruptive, and the trust just evaporates from everybody. So you don't want to do that, and you can avoid doing so because you can just have a bunch of people that can scale in and scale out more naturally and kind of voluntarily. Like they wouldn't want to sign a full-time contract. As you say, a lot of freelancers voluntarily in this, so they wouldn't sign a full-time job. So number one, it gives you organizational flexibility. Number two, there's also that kind of skills delivery, isn't it? I mean, there's sometimes you can not hire the permanent sort of skills. Like there's certain people that are either hyper skilled, or they know that they can make more by being on the freelance market than they can ever do doing perm. And so, you have to go to the freelancer marketplace. I'm reminded actually of old school like COBOL programmers. I don't know whether you're old enough to remember those folks, Runa.
No, actually not.
COBOL, man. That is like the
I remember the name.
Yeah, it's like basically all the stuff that goes into banking sort of programming and stuff like this. And I think they're all now freelancers, simply because there's a very small coterie of people that are able to work with the technology, and no one new is wanting to learn it because it's very old technology, and they're actually like dying off and retiring off. So it's an ever shrinking market, and so obviously it makes no sense being a permanent employee. Pop yourself out, just sell your service back in as a freelancer, and you kind of max out your earnings. So there is a scenario where there's an inability to hire the skills permanently. And thirdly, this idea of having a skills taxonomy beyond the full-time workforce, so that you can then start thinking, okay, if we have this unpredictable world, which we clearly do, we actually need to have a much more expansive view as to what our talent universe looks like, so to say. Because if we have 100 full-time employees, we may actually have 200 people that surround that either were former employees, have been ex-contractors, could be alumni folks. A lot of alumni actually come back as freelance, I think. They don't often come back as perm because, there's a reason why they left in the first place, but they still have like amazing institutional knowledge and all those types of things. But it gives you that ability to plan for an uncertain future. So super interesting. Is there any way in which you could tell us that that's like an increase of demand? Like, how do you know that is it more like you get the vibe on this, Runar, or is there any way you can say actually more companies are onboarding on platform and they're looking for this rather than that, and we kind of see that as a move towards a more strategic sort of approach?
Well, we see it in all the research that's been done. So whenever Gartner asks the leaders around the world what's their major challenges and how they're going to fix it, the major challenges are skill gaps. How to fix it? Increase the use of contractors. So I think this is a well-established pattern now. It's obviously not the only thing that drives it, right? But I think the two other factors really. One is the pace of change that you said. And when you have a pace of change and you say, well, this company needs to adapt really quickly because otherwise a competitor that's going to be AI enabled is going to come in and take over. You might be kind of used to have back in the old days, you know, had a 10-year warning before they became big. Then technology happened and you had maybe a 3-year warning. Now you have a 3 months warning. So what are freelancers and contractors really good at? One, they're really good at change because they don't have any vested interest in the status quo. So the change management that you need to take a company through becomes so much easier when the change is, hey, let's gather a band of flexible workers here and let them charge into the change because they're not wedded to the status quo in any way. The other thing is obviously they are well versed in new technologies because, as we discussed, they're upskilling themselves constantly, even more so in a tough market. And they then have a much shorter time to value than an employee. So I go out, I hire an employee tomorrow. It's the first time in 3-4 years they've changed jobs. That's a skill set to change jobs, onboarding themselves in a new context, etc. It takes a while. I would kind of normally expect it takes 3 months until they're quite usable, 6 months until they're at level, 9-12 months, then they're exceptional. I go to a contractor. This is the 5th time in the quarter or in the year that they've changed jobs and changed companies. It's a skill and they are expert at it. They hit the ground running much, much faster. So when a company is faced with a challenge that they need to adapt to, and I've been this, I worked in large companies and we would need 2 years to set up a team to run it and another 2 years to fire it afterward when it didn't work. So to Kai's point here, that's hugely demotivating because the promise you make to an employee is this is a long-term engagement. We're going to grow you, etc. And if you break that promise, of course, bad things happen. It has a cultural impact. You make no such promise to a contractor. You make the promise to say, I need you for your skills. This is a business-to-business relationship. You're a business, we're a business, we buy from you, and you supply to us. And there are no broken promises once that has been delivered. There's no question of what happens next. Where's my promotion? The other thing that's affecting this need and the desire of 65% of companies to go more contracting, and if we can talk a little bit UK, it is that the cost of your employee workforce is going up. Right? There is higher national insurance. There is higher income tax. There is more worker rights. I'm not for a moment going to say that's a bad thing, but from a company's point of view, it's a cost. The cost comes with value. But again, if you're just looking for skills for a limited period of time, the cost of having an employee do it starts going up. The cost of having a contractor do it is not going up with the same mechanics. I think it will go up as the economy recovers. And again, this is a market dynamics are at play. But there are some external factors that make the cost of an employee workforce go up. Every company in the UK is feeling it right now. And that obviously in a time where most companies are pressed by the macro environment, obviously look, they will look at other ways to get the same work done.
All right, listen, Runa. Every time you say something, there's like 5 or 6 things that come out that could just like we could spider off into different topics that are so interesting. Let's try and like deal with them like one by one. There's one thing you mentioned right at the beginning of that little monologue, which I didn't even realize was actually freelancers are really good change agents, because they're not vested in the status quo. Of course not. So, and we're in the middle of transformation, aren't we, folks? Like we're trying to AI enable our organizations. We're trying to do all of this. Guess what? Maybe a big part of the reason why we've been slow in doing this is because we've got a lot of people that are really invested in things as they are. I mean, I'm trying to think of, let's say, a classic example that's been in the news recently. You look at VW in Germany. That might have had just loads of vested interest keeping it as is until there's such a point now where they're in a massive crisis because they've just had, plenty of time to position, but they've not been able to do it because the vested interest has just been so powerful. Freelancer has no vested interest. Their interest is actually getting the job done, maybe to the satisfaction of the person who's brought them in, so they could roll another contract in. Therefore, if you've brought them in as a change agent, they're going to be your change agent. So really, really good concept. So I would imagine any company that's trying to do a transformation probably needs to look at the FTE, non-FTE balance of workforce that they have and just broadly think, yeah, we need to kind of increase the non-FTE because we need less people invested in status quo. Second thing that you mentioned was really interesting was the onboard speed, like the ramp speed, shall we say. So of course, a freelancer, it goes through lots of projects. I mean, I don't know whether you know what the average is per year on the platform, but let's say a full-time worker, I think the tenure is still about 2 years, 3 years plus. So over the course of a 30-year career, you might just change jobs like 10 times or so. And each time you've got probably a 12-week ramp because you've got probation period, you got all of this stuff going on. And onboarding is an entire category of services, right, that we have produced because it's so difficult. But a freelancer might actually do what, 50, 100 projects a year? I don't know, like not a year,
not so many.
Lifetime wise.
Oh, absolutely, more than that. We have contractors on the platform that have done 300, 400 different projects. But generally, projects, if you're in the creative space, would be around 6 weeks on average. If you're in the more of the engineering technical space, it's more 3 months per average. So anywhere between kind of 4 and 8 per year. That's a lot more than 1 every 4 years. Yeah. It builds that skill. Now, we haven't talked about all the drawbacks of that. Like, there are massive drawbacks, because that freelancer leaves, they don't, the knowledge is not retained. So by no means am I advocating a future where, and we see nothing in the research where companies say, oh, we're going to not have employees, we're just going to have contractors. On the contrary, the employees will be the heart of the company. The contractors are the additional layer of skills and change and everything you need. But in order to retain that as the more kind of flexible workforce transitions through, you have to have really good employees. So if anything, the employees that are there, the demand on them becomes bigger, not smaller.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. Let's bring on Sonal on this. I want to get a sort of input from the buy side, because obviously it's great to have the overview and so forth, but I want to know how the people on the internal side that are making decisions as to how to hire, etc., how that sort of works in. So let's see whether we can bring Sonal on here. A couple more things. I mean, you might not know this, so if you don't know that, do let me know. Gender, freelancers, is there any like gender variance in the sorts of work that men and women do on the freelancer side? Is there anything on platform that can give us any trend on that?
Yes. So unsurprisingly, in kind of more technical fields, there is still a gender split with more male freelancers doing engineering, developing, etc. And on the more creative side, the marketing side, there is a bit more of a female bias to that. What is interesting though, and we test this and check this on an annual basis. So last time we checked across 300,000 different freelancer contracts and contractor contracts across all disciplines, and we found no difference in pay across genders. So that sounds like utopia, right? Because that sounds like where we should all be heading towards. And I think it's because, again, it's just a faster moving. All these people have been negotiating their contract within the last months. And within the last month, there hasn't been an issue around who you are. If you go 10 years, 20 years back, there's been a massive issue. But that issue seems to have dissolved, at least when it comes to skill-based hiring. And as you said, freelancer hiring is skill-based hiring. And when it comes to skill-based hiring, it's more important what your skills are than what your personal situation is. Things like remote working kind of work into this as well, because it doesn't really matter if you have to be homebound. So that's one change, and it's a positive one.
I'll bring you in a sec, but I was kind of like thinking, hang on, that's quite strange to hear about. Sort of quite strange to hear about. There's no discernible difference between men and women's pay, but then it kind of clicked in to say, yeah, maybe that's clear because you kind of published the rate on ads. It's like clear what the budget is, right? So there's less of the negotiation stuff ever going on. It's like, here's what the pay is, and on you go. You don't really care either side. So it may well be there's a lot of more transparency on freelancer or non-FTE hiring, and more of a clear transaction. Here's my skill, here's my time, here's the pay, here's the job. Let's do that, and then we'll think about it as we go on. Very interesting. Let's bring in Sonal Bhardwaj. Sonal, how are you doing? Wonderful to see you again. Can you quickly introduce yourself? Who are you? What it is you do?
Sure. Hey, Hung, and hello, everyone. Thanks for inviting me to the podcast. My name is Sonal, and I'm part of Capgemini Financial Services. It's a group company of Capgemini. I'm based in the UK, and my remit is all hiring, FTE and freelancing included, for our FS business for the UK and Ireland.
That's already very interesting, Sonal, because we kind of rolled into this conversation with the stereotype that TA would only do kind of FT generally. That's the kind of the natural sort of way. But here you're saying you actually do FTE and non-FTE. Was that kind of a transition to all of it, or was it always the case given the nature of the work, sort of nature of the business Capgem is?
It's always been the same way. It's operationally run by different teams. They work together, like procurement, TA, as well as the business. But the fact that whether should we hire a FTE versus freelancer, that decision is made by the business, and then it's sort of implemented by the TA along with other teams. So hence it becomes sort of our remit to see that how we are fulfilling the position, doesn't matter which channel it's fulfilled through.
Do you know sort of what goes into that decision? Like why is a certain job go into FTE and not? I mean, have you got a sort of any sense as to what that is?
Yeah, of course. I think there are many factors which influence that decision, and some of them I think you and Runar were already discussing. But I think based on my experience, clearly how the business is structured, it's going to largely determine what is going to be the workforce composition. It also depends on the nature of business. Like our nature of business, we have a lot of work which is with our clients. So it also depends on the kind of work that we have, the length and duration of the work. So sometimes some of the work that, let's say we work with a lot of banks, the work probably is short term. It's 3 months, 6 months. Some of it would be long-term engagements. So that definitely determines whether you would want to, let's say, staff it with internal contractor or FTE. I also think it's the commercials. And I think the last bit of your discussion did share some insights into it. So what's the kind of rates that we have? If the business is into consulting, there is always a client that is in play, and there's always going to be billing, whether it is for hourly or day rates. So that I think largely determines as well. And I think very important for any corporate is that what are the kind of investments we want to make if we want to hire employees, which is FTEs, right? So, example, if we see that, let's say Gen AI, which is something that's really revolutionizing everything that we are doing, especially coming from tech industry, we would want to make some sort of investment so that we have that capability in the organization. So while a short-term work on, let's say, Gen AI could easily be done by a freelancer, but we would want to have those kind of skills and competencies in the organization, which means we would definitely invest in hiring some FTEs for it, but maybe in some other skills where either the availability is low or it's a skill which is either not very fungible with the organization setup. I think it would be a freelancer.
Yeah, yeah, very interesting. So, there's another layer of strategy then, isn't there? Because the strategy in terms of the deliverables now, but long term, like what is the kind of institutional value you want to bring into your business? And if you think, what, we think that AI is going to be sort of a core skill set for every employee in our business, then yeah, you probably want to make sure that the people coming into your company are going to be, it would be very good to get individuals permanently working in your organization. But at the same time, you can say, hey, a skilled freelancer that's working in the field may also have the ability to disperse those skills internally if that's part of the brief. I mean, that's actually worth talking about as well, just as a little aside, because on the one hand, we know that if we're hiring for a skill set that we can't really hire easily on full-time employment, we get them in as a contractor or freelancer. It's sometimes quite hard to get them to spread the skills around because they know that maybe their market value is kind of like very much to hold it. So how do we deal with that problem? I mean, do you got any sort of thoughts or experience there? I mean, Sonal, I guess from Capgem's perspective, and Aruna, I'd actually like to get your view on it. If you have any sort of zoom out view as to how we can get freelancers to share what they know a little bit more. Go ahead, Sonal, you got a thought?
Yeah, I think some of the skills I think which you were discussing, it is very it's very hard to find FTEs. So those skills I think would be more prevalent, and we've seen that with technology skills, high technology skills, and that's I think more driven because I think the freelancer community makes more money on those skills because they are high end skills, and it is difficult to find. The clients are willing to pay top dollar for it. Hence, I think those continue to remain in the, you can say they're more in freelancing. I have seen that some of the freelancers with those skills, when they are within the organization, they undergo their own transformation and see the kind of work that we are doing. Sometimes the appetite for just doing it as a freelancer is not too high. They want to seek some sort of more meaningful work in those areas. For example, I'm just giving an example that, we have so much of investment in Gen AI with our clients. The kind of work that we are doing, it's very, it's like next gen. We've not even kind of in public forum been even talking about that sort of work that we are doing with our clients. So when some of these freelancers, they with these kind of tech, when they work on such kind of projects with us, they would want to be part of it for long term. So some of them do also get absorbed based on, of course, our own appetite into the as an employee, as part of our FTE workforce as well.
Yeah, Ruda, bringing you in, have there been any contracts on the platform which explicitly say you're also there to teach other people your stuff? I mean, and if so, like, what's the prevalence of those?
I'm sure there have, but I think it's a lot of learning happens through osmosis. So the way I look at this, and of course we're also a company, we're not just a freelance platform, and the way we do it internally. So we use about 30% contractors and 70% employees. My view on this personally, just as a leader, is you hire your FTEs smart and you hire them for potential, because you want them to be there a long time and you want them to grow really quickly when they're there. You don't hire a freelancer for potential, right? You hire them for the skill they already have. You do not want to be the one paying them for upskilling. So what happens if you couple a smart, high potential, knowledge hungry employee with a highly skilled, experienced freelancer? Osmosis. So we see that there are a lot of that transfer of knowledge happens very naturally. We bring somebody in at a very high skill level, the employees that work with them, and just make sure they always partner with employees. The employees that work with them, they won't get to the same specialism, of course, because that's not what they're there to do, but they'll upskill in that area to a degree where they can either say, well, that is really interesting, I want to go and teach myself that, and the company can help. Or when that contractor freelancer leaves, there is enough of a knowledge left that it can be retained and built on. So for me, it's if I was to write a brief to say you need to leave some knowledge behind in the company, I'll just partner them with really smart employees.
Yeah, really good. Osmotic information transfer, folks. That was the most charming phrase I learned during COVID, which is simply the idea that you're going to learn by simply either observing or overhearing or being part of a group where information is shared in an undirected way. And it's almost unavoidable. If you're an individual that's sensitive to information coming at you and you can see learning opportunities, it's unavoidable not to learn them. So that is a really smart way of thinking about it. And by the way, I love the idea that, the perm employees should be high potential, high learning types necessarily. That should be your priority. And your employees are not that way. Sorry, your full-timers, your freelancers are not that way, precisely because you don't want to be spending money for them to upskill. That's not the task. They're upskilling themselves by going to do the contracts and going to other places. And in fact, you're possibly paying a per hourly premium for them not to have the need to ramp up in that way. So that is a very sort of interesting thing to think about when people are thinking about skills-based hiring, by the way, folks, because I think we kind of think skills-based hiring might be the panacea per se, but for full-time workers, you need to think, look, are we hiring for skills only, or are we hiring for potential? In which case, it's not the same as a skill. So we need to kind of claw that down a little bit more and dig into it. But folks, before we kind of continue the conversation, we always have to take a mini break. A reason why is because this conversation will have to come off air in due course, and it will be a terrible shame if the conversation we've started has to stop simply because Brain Food Live has to stop broadcasting. The idea behind what we're doing here is that everyone needs to be connected. Everyone needs to be able to continue the conversation offline or in any other space that you want to or feel comfortable in, irrespective of whether we're still talking. So best way to do that is, of course, to make sure you're thoroughly connected with everyone who's also watching the show. So take a moment, grab your LinkedIn URL and just share it in the chat stream here if you're watching it on Crowdcast, and then connect with everyone else that you see doing the same thing. I think we are broadcasting this on like multiple LinkedIns. In fact, I think it may be the record-breaking number of LinkedIn multicasts we're doing now. I think there's over 20 being pumped out here. So we're probably taking over LinkedIn a little bit. But if you're watching this on any of the LinkedIns, then grab your LinkedIn URL, chuck it in the comment thread there, and then just make sure you connect with other people that are doing the same. Worst case scenario is you're going to walk away with a bunch of people that care about this topic, and you can continue having that dialogue with them as we go forward. Sonal, Runar said himself that his business currently has a 70 to 30 FTE freelancer split. What is the split currently in Capgem? And what do you think is a good ratio for a company that is, let's say, a non-consultancy business? Like, do you have a sense of that? What are your thoughts?
Can't really talk about. I honestly don't know. Cap is really, really a large ocean. But if I look at the kind of recruitment we are doing, I think I would say 35% of recruitment that we are doing today is freelancers. Again, that keep varying according to situation, depending on how the year unfolds, what kind of business we have. So I think 60, 40, 70, 30, depending on the nature of business, would be really a healthy mix of freelancing versus FTE, especially in the tech sector.
That's actually a really interesting number. I think that's probably a bit higher than most people would think. I think most people are probably 90-10, I would say, full-time freelance. And with the old psychology of freelance being kind of an interim stopgap solution. But if we start thinking of freelancing as just a part of a holistic talent or skills acquisition strategy, we should probably will see that sort of kind of level up in a 70-30 type of mix, even more so.
I just wanted to, add, is that I think the way things are changing, it's not just only the nature of the business, but I think it's the nature of the workforce as well. Today, the average age of the workforce is, I think, maybe 30, 33, the average. We are now into Gen Z being the prominently start being the majority of the workforce. And if we look at the way this workforce is, it's very pixelated, as Josh Bersin calls it, pixelated workforce.
Yep.
So they want to do a lot of stuff, right? They just don't want to be tied up into even one contract as a freelancer contract. There's side hustle, then there is different other gigs that they are doing, wellness, and so many other things that they are dabbling into at one point. So I think the trend is going to be more and more towards gig economy, given the change in the workforce dynamics, not just the demand.
Okay, so this is actually a really interesting segue. Is there a huge difference generationally with the kind of willingness to do freelance, let's say? I mean, is that something? I don't want to again roll into gender sort of generation stereotypes, but are we detecting, for instance, a greater willingness for different generations to do work in this way? What any data you can share with us on this, Runa, or it's not possible to capture that to date?
I have a bit of a prior experience around Gen Zs because I worked at a company called Depop, which was a marketplace exclusively for Gen Zs, and the sellers and the buyers I got to know there convinced me that I should be joining Unijuno, because it was very clear that that generation is not looking at the kind of traditional career trajectory as a way to success. In some cases, and of course these are young people, they might kind of mellow and change their minds. They're looking at it as a failure. So there's quite an anti get employed. If you go on TikTok, there's tons and tons of videos around kind of how to avoid ending up in employment.
Wow.
So it's the complete opposite of what our parents wanted us to do, isn't it?
Yeah.
So yes, I completely agree with Snell. There's probably data on it. I don't have it.
It's a creator economy, as they say, right?
Yeah, the observation is very accurate. These people they've been mini entrepreneurs since they were 16, and that's not going to stop just because they come into a workforce age.
Do you know what? It's certainly, you mentioned creator economy is kind of an influence on freelance, and I think even though they're not directly the same thing, I think they do feed into each other, because if you're on TikTok and you've had some experience of earning some money through it, you could be a young person. You could be pre-employment and earning some money through some creative stuff you're doing. And then, of course, that's going to switch you on to, okay, there may be other ways in which you can make your way going forward without sort of going through that traditional track, which is rapidly becoming just one other track. It's wrong to say, it's a traditional track these days because it is just one of a number of options. And who is to say that working in this way is a bad thing? I mean, I do know, particularly in the creator economy per se, that there's very small numbers of people, make the ridiculous numbers that you see out there. But at the same time, there's probably a decent percentage that make reasonable, where it's not an insignificant or, it's a non-trivial amount of a supplementary income for them. And of course, that's got to make them think, hey, maybe I could do one or two freelancer things alongside one big project, let's say, and the aggregate of all of those incomes could well be equivalent to, if not more so, than a full-time job. Okay, let's project future forward. Let's put our kind of Mystic Meg kind of a crystal ball in and look at 2025. What would you say are are the main things that is sort of you think are likely to happen? So in other words, these are like I won't say conventions, but let's say the consensus opinions you think are going to happen in freelance economy. Then I'm going to ask you for like a non-consensus opinion where you think, okay, you've got a marginal view of something, but you got a feeling that this is going to be the case. So Runa, I mean, it's unfair advantage for you given the fact you got access to sort of proprietary data, but do you have sort of some inkling as to where the freelancer economy is going to be in 2025?
Yeah, and it's very conventional because I think it's very obvious. And we see a lot of contractors that are and have been reskilling themselves into Gen AI. And we see that is both the category that's most in demand and the category that's the fastest growing in terms of supply. So if freelancers will kind of forgive me for calling them supply, that there is more and more freelancers that are coming to the market that have, no one has 10 years of experience in Gen AI, do they? That have spent the last year and a half really digging into this, becoming good, and then are now coming to the market and can offer themselves at an expert level. And they are, when I look and I say freelance availability at an all-time high, there are notable exceptions, and Gen AI freelancers are a notable exception. Anyone that is ingesting data into AI as well is a bit of a notable exception. So that is the trend where most companies are looking for skills. And I think, as Sonal said, it's very important that those companies don't see it as a skill that comes and goes. But at the same time, I think most companies will struggle to find people who can come in where you can predictably know that their skills will also be relevant in 24 months. So I think companies are saying there, I was speaking to one CEO, they said, we have so little visibility of what's going to happen to our business in the next 24 months because of this, that we've just stopped hiring. We'll wait and see. We'll get our skills through a flexible workforce. And then when we see where we're going to end up, we're then going to hire up. That's one way of looking at it.
Yeah, the VUCA world, folks, the volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous world. So in other words, we haven't got a clue what's happening. And when we don't have that clue, then obviously fixed investments are going to be something that we're going to try and avoid. We're going to want the flexibility. And this is not just payroll. This is like services. This is anything like renting office apartments or whatever it is. It's like your role is to try and keep it as agile and as skinny as possible. And in the interim, you got to do work. You got to grow as a business, and that's where these solutions come in. Sonal, your thoughts on this? Any conventional things that you're happy to predict before we go on to unconventional speculations?
I think I would break it down into the demand scenario and the supply scenario, which I think would be there in 2025. I think this year has been really a mixed bag. We had a very flat start of the year. And then I think three big elections happened: India, US, and UK. And a lot of clients had put their investments in projects which could wait on hold, which has caused also a lot of workforce to either there's been downsizing, there's been redundancy, layoffs, which we all have seen through that's happened. So I think the demand may come back in 2025 with all those projects which were stalled now. Probably would be taken up by the banks or the large companies. That's I think the demand will be more, is my view on the demand. The supply, I think at the moment is pretty high. Lots of freelancers and even folks, those who are interested in FTEs is there in the market. And that's largely because this year has been very, very, you can say in terms of graph, it's gone too much up and down. So there's a lot of supply that is there. So I think freelancing opportunities and demand and supply both is going to be high in my view in 2025. So it could be, if not exactly in the post-pandemic era if we go back, but I think we would probably have a good, interesting year, 2025.
Yeah, really, really cool. Okay, let's focus a little bit now on final question, I guess. So some of the people listening to this might be heads of TA. probably are in terms of my audience, and they're thinking, all right, great. I think I do need to expand my freelancer portfolio, sort of a percentage, my ratio there. But it's kind of like not being in their wheelhouse. So they're not quite sure how to do that, or what skills that need to be in there, or even how to, optimize for it. How do you actually run an organization in this way, even if it's like their own department? So you can imagine a head of TA previously having only full-time employees. Now they're thinking, actually, maybe I need to be 70-30 on this. What advice do you have for a manager that's wanting to succeed managing this kind of employment diversity within their function? And, any tips that you might want to offer on that? Runa, you want to answer this one?
Yeah, so maybe it comes back to this, the non-conventional answer also to what they need to do. So I have a very clear view on what they need to do. And that is, if they are in a larger company, they're probably in a company that has many moons and years ago outsourced everything that is contingent workforce. So they have no way of controlling it because it's been outsourced to another company that has said, yeah, we will kind of find and manage your contingent workforce for you. And if it's outsourced and you're the head of TA, there's very little you can really control. You can control your vendor, but that doesn't really control it. So my advice there would be take control. If I could be really kind of on the blunt side, fire your MSP. That's the first thing that needs to happen. Because you have to, you're going to have to work directly with these people and directly with your recruiters, right? You need to get closer to your supply chain, just as you are on the FTE talent acquisition. So I think that's the first thing that needs to happen, and I think that's going to knock on the door of your procurement colleagues and say, rather than outsourcing it, I'm here, I'm going to take it on. It's going to save us money and it's going to give us better skills. Everyone wins. Maybe not everyone. There might be a loser in there somewhere.
No, but ripping off the Band-Aid, but at the same time, that's really quite important for your own sort of expansion of scope, isn't it? Because if you're used to just chucking it over the fence for an external third party to manage, then of course you are not actually developing your skill set with regards to managing that workforce, who you can anticipate being a larger part of your future. So it may well be time to do that. Radical steps, though, Sunil. What are your thoughts on this? Fire the MSP. That's a big step, isn't it? I mean, there's a reason why they're there. Obviously, they've got to manage a massive workforce of talent and whatnot. What would your advice be? I mean, I guess you may even be advising yourself here, Sunil. But in terms of your own view, how do you actually get good at managing a mixed workforce of freelancers and full time?
I think first, the starting point would be procuring the talent, right? And as Runar said, and I have very strong view on the fact that we need to enhance the use of technology. We use, for example, LinkedIn to find FT employees. We use so many other job boards. But when it comes to contingent workforce, many organizations have outsourced it. So speed is the key element. It's like the top element when it comes to finding freelancers. That's why that model works in the organizations. So I think adopting a technology platform like Juno or maybe other whichever fits your business would be a great starting point. Then second would be, yes, you need to be engaged with either the platform or the recruiters directly managing the workforce. That would be essential if you need to ace the game of getting people with speed. And yes, I think the main sticky point, which many times the TA leads start thinking, should we really get into it, is all the compliance, the regulatory, in the UK context, the IR35. I think that part, I would say we should leave it to some of the professionals, like maybe Runar or one solicitors, or I don't know, whichever way fits into your organization and their budget. That I think I would suggest is something could be outsourced, but the finding and the managing could be kept within your organization.
Yeah, and we haven't even touched upon things like performance management and integrating cultures and all that kind of stuff. But that might have to sort of be left for a second round of this, because we have come to the end of time today, folks. So thank you very much, firstly, to our wonderful guests. Been very, very educational. There's lots of really interesting points made here. Maybe something that we should write a blog on, you know, all of the benefits of. I think there's a lot of things that people might not initially get. Particularly things like ramp up time and change agency and so on. So wonderful to have you on. Sonal, great to see you. Thanks for hanging on. I know Friday sort of it's time, you know, people are zoning out and, you know, need to think on weekends. So wonderful to have you. You have a very good weekend. Thanks for joining Brain Food Live. And Runa, listen, I'm always very sensitive to CEOs taking time out of their day to spend time talking to us. So thank you so much for your time and joining us today and sharing not only your insight, but also the data from the platform as well. Great to have you, Runa, and have a very good weekend. Cool. Wasn't that interesting, folks? Super interesting. I love this series. Look back on 2024. Kind of makes me sad, though, because we are coming to the end of the year. But don't worry, there's another year's worth of recruiting Brain Food sort of live coming at you sooner than we think. It's December next week. Would you Adam and Eve it? We're going to keep rolling forward, folks, because next week we are talking about 2004 year in review. We're going to be talking about job board advertising, job advertising in general. We've got some amazing guests to join us for this. We've got Peter Weddle, who's the CEO of TA Tech. We've got Yaz Dalal, who's the CRO of Jovio. We've got Alexander Chukovsky, who is just a Mr. sort of SEO legend when it comes to job boards. Like, what is the state of recruitment advertising, folks? Do we even know what's happened when we post an advert out in 2024? All of that is going to be reviewed next week on Brain Food Lab on air. If you've enjoyed sort of this show, make sure you follow the channel. You'll be notified whenever we go live. And of course, the show for next week is already up. You can subscribe. You can register for that now, free to attend. And we'll be back with you at 2 p.m. Next week. Thanks for watching, everybody.